Greetings. This brief webinar will describe the work of the OPI American Indian Achievement Task Force. We will review the purpose of the task force, its membership, its progress to date, and anticipated next steps. Thank you for listening. OPI has many programs and services geared to support American Indian students who attend public schools on Indian reservations. While we can point to significant progress, the dropout rate for American Indian students has fallen by 30%. We know student achievement continues to fall far short. American Indian students graduate at rates much lower than white students, and their college-going rates are in single digits. Clearly, we can do better. State Superintendent Denise Juneau established the task force in November 2015. The task force is charged with developing an actionable plan to help guide the agency's work with schools that serve American Indian students. The focus of the plan is to guide the agency's efforts to 1. Improve collaboration between OPI divisions, schools, and tribes. 2. Build capacity of schools that serve American Indian students. And 3. Build capacity of OPI to meet the academic and social needs of American Indian students living in isolated communities, that is, our public schools and Indian reservations. Superintendent Juneau appointed staff from across the agency in order to create a multidisciplinary team that can bring their varied expertise and experiences, the good and the bad, into the work of the task force. The task force is led by Indian Education Director Mandy Smoker-Broaddus and Senior Policy Advisor Deb Halliday, and receives technical assistance from Aurora Moore of Education Northwest. The task force meets once a month to share progress and insights and to provide feedback to the different components of the developing plan. All task force notes are available for OPI staff to review on Insight under Projects AIA Task Force. We will now share with you our progress to date. The task force uses this flowchart to guide its progress. In this webinar, we will describe our work as it progressed through these 3 phases: discovery, design, and do. Phase, discovery, the task force began by establishing that the focus of the work is public schools that operate on Indian reservations, with the knowledge that the students who attend these schools disproportionately suffer from the chronic challenges that these schools experience. To understand the history of OPI's efforts to support American Indian achievement, the staff compiled an organizational timeline that maps the policies and programs and lessons learned since the Montana State Constitution first established the expectation of American Indian educational equality in the 1970s. The timeline clearly illustrates the increasing capacity and the deepening understanding that OPI staff have of what works and doesn't work in our efforts to support American Indian student success. For instance, staff articulated a growing consensus that the community must be involved in school improvement efforts, that cultural responsiveness is a must, and that youth's social and emotional needs are as relevant as their educational needs. With clarity on focus and a good sense of the history of OPI's efforts, the task force then conducted a root cause analysis in which divisions across the agency were invited to participate in a fishbone diagram activity. To start this work, the task force articulated a problem statement that we asked our colleagues to consider. The statement is: outcomes for students on reservations are in need of improvement, opportunities for improvement, and are not deliberate or targeted. As an agency, what we're doing isn't working well enough. For example, knowledge, sharing, coherence, theory of action, relationships, to strengthen student success. For each division, task force members led their colleagues in a conversation about the root causes of what staff perceive as the reasons why student outcomes are in need of improvement and why our agency's efforts fall short. Here is an example of one division's conversation. The superintendent's office staff, we immediately identified the external factors that we felt are out of our circle of influence and yet affect our work, geographic isolation, and poverty. We then shifted our focus to the question at hand and identified several root causes, such as teacher recruitment and retention, and OPI's lack of a shared understanding of what individual schools need and how we can effectively triage schools. With each root cause, we asked ourselves, why? So for why does OPI lack this shared understanding? We identified deeper root causes such as one rule for every school, which doesn't allow for the unique circumstances of fragile school systems in Indian country, or the reality that it came by time consuming to become more coordinated as an agency, and many of OPI's programs are organized around federal funding, which can lead to further disconnects. Each division developed their own fishbone, and then task force members compiled them into one mega fishbone for the agency. Task force members sorted the feedback from agency colleagues into categories, such as technology, programs, people relationships, processes and structures. We also sorted the causes by those that are internal to the agency and those that are external to the agency. For example, the root cause of high turnover of administrators and teachers was placed under the category of processes and structures, as well as in the external to the agency section, as OPI has limited ability to influence this common occurrence. The root cause of OPI divisions working in silos was also placed in the category of processes and structures, but was placed in the internal to the agency section, as OPI can do something to break down the lack of programmatic coordination and information sharing that currently occurs in the agency. Task force members then identified root causes that several different OPI divisions had identified. These are marked with red dots and include schools, crisis response to administrative turnover, communication between the tribes, districts, and OPI, OPI divisions working in silos, and its corollary, lots of OPI personnel supporting districts without coordination. This analysis helped the task force move on to the next phase of the process, design. The task force entered the design phase in May and began working in two areas. One, a theory of action, and two, protocols of how the agency can do things differently as a result of our root cause analysis. The passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, by Congress made the work of the task force even more timely, as core questions regarding services, support, and accountability must be addressed. Fortunately, several task force members also serve on ESSA work groups, and the task force regularly communicates with the ESSA project management team. To develop a theory of action, task force members who manage major initiatives that are focused on American Indian student achievement convened off-site for a day-long meeting to identify common elements and lessons learned in their approaches. The task force members discussed four major OPI initiatives that are focused on American Indian student achievement and/or public schools on Indian reservations. The four major OPI initiatives represented were Montana Schools of Promise, which engages in deep school improvement efforts in the state's lowest performing schools, all of which are on Indian reservations. Striving Readers, which provides coaching and professional development to administrators and teachers on improving literacy efforts. Title I, Homeless, which works with schools to identify more students who are experiencing homelessness and then works with schools and community organizations to increase supportive services for those students. And MBI, Indigenous, which is working with tribal elders, American Indian coaches, and others to develop a more culturally relevant approach to MBI in Indian country. The task force work group then drafted the theory of action, which includes two sections, an overall agency approach and specific program strategies. For example, in the overall agency approach section, the following can be seen. If we adapt a 7 to 8 year plan for each priority school, then priority schools will transition from being in need of deep school improvement to being able to benefit from the services of the Title I school support team, which offers much less intensive supports. We all know because priority schools will no longer qualify for more comprehensive assistance as reflected by student achievement and improved school operations. The program strategy section includes the idea of assigning a school board coach to a school and states. If we assign a school board coach, then school boards will develop stronger policies and improve implementation. Support for administration will increase and lead to less turnover and chaos. We will know this is a success because we will see updated school board policy manuals, efficient and effective school board agendas, and see increased quality and regularity of communication between school board chairs and the school superintendent. The work group brought these theories of action to the full task force, and we are currently revising them based on task force input. If you would like to look at the draft, it is available on Insight under Projects, AIA Task Force. The second area of focus in the design phase is to develop protocols to guide how the agency can do things differently as a result of our root cause analysis. The task force is currently working on 2 protocols that we hope to pilot this fall. One is related to communications and coordination of OPI's efforts in Indian country. The other addresses how OPI program staff approach grant opportunities that include work in schools on Indian reservations. To launch the Communication Coordination Protocol, task force members shared their vision of how the agency can better coordinate internally and externally with schools on Indian reservations. Members quickly identified common elements that they believe will reduce the likelihood that OPI divisions will work in silos, that OPI personnel will support districts without coordination, and that OPI will be able to implement components of the theory of action. Task force members quickly realized that talk of coordination and communication relate directly to ESSA, because the state plan has to articulate how we will support the lowest performing schools. Here is the current draft of the task force approach to comprehensive support for the state's lowest performing schools. It shows how a team of 3 OPI staff will meet monthly to coordinate a district school improvement plan, including gathering data and current plans to guide the work, and that OPI administration will help to ensure that there are quarterly meetings of OPI program staff who work with these schools. Task force members are now drafting a communication coordination protocol that will help to guide these teams of 3 OPI staff who are responsible for coordinating the services and supports that OPI and external partners will provide these schools. The task force will continue to meet this fall to further flesh out the protocols and to begin piloting them to see how feasible and impractical they can be. Members also are reaching out to OPI colleagues to share this webinar and to respond to staff feedback on the task force work. This fall, we will also reach out to school staff and colleagues and program staff from external partners to share our progress and to get their input and feedback.